Greetings from First Baptist Church here in Hawthorne, Nevada. We also have finally had to cancel services and kind of hunker down where we are. This has caused a lot of concern, a lot of fear, a lot of alarm. And we want to look at a couple of verses of Scripture that talk about that. David is very familiar with the danger that you can be in, not just danger from a virus, but the very real danger of an enemy. Tradition says that Psalm 3 was written the night before a big battle between Absalom's army that was much, much larger and David's army, which was much, much smaller. As was common in those days, they would sit up on opposing hillsides so that they could see the enemy, but they were somewhat safe from the enemy. And as David is sitting there, tradition says, we find that David is maybe looking across the valley at the large number of campfires that are over there and recognizing that his army is very small. And the next day, the two armies would come together and fight. And the one goal of all the soldiers huddled around all those campfires is to kill David. That would cause many of us to be very, very fearful. But David says, "O Lord, how many are my foes? Many are rising against me. Many are saying of my soul, there is no salvation for him in God." And from a human perspective, there was no salvation. David was going to lose the next day. He knew how battles went. He knew how to figure the odds and all of that. He was a skilled warrior. But David had God in the equation. And as we look at this passage, we're going to find that we ought to trust God. First of all, we see here, because we are in danger. David was in physical danger of the battle the next day. Everybody was going to be trying to kill David. He was the one goal. Today we have another enemy. We can't see it except through a microscope. We have a virus, a coronavirus. And it's a scary thing because you can have the coronavirus for a week or even almost 2 weeks, show no symptoms, and yet be contagious and pass it to somebody else. So there's a lot of fear about that. There's a lot of ill at ease because this is something that we can't see, and so we're frantically washing our hands and using hand gel and disinfectant spray and all of these kinds of things. And that's a good thing to do. David faced that same kind of situation, maybe a little more visible, but he faced that same kind of situation. And we find that he says you can trust God. David goes on to say, in spite of all of the problems, David said, "But you, O Lord, you're a shield about me. You are my glory and the lifter of my head. I cried aloud to the Lord." That's a good plan. As we find that we're in danger, crying to God is a good thing. But David says, "And God answered me." And so as we talk about trusting God, we ought to trust God because God does know our danger. This is not a surprise to him. This didn't catch him off guard. God knew all about this. And so God knows our situation. He asks us to come to him and talk to him about it. And so that's one of the directives we ought to be putting into place. As we have those times of fear, stop and ask God, help me, protect me, guard me, or do what you will with me through this. David does something unusual at this point. He says, "I prayed to God, God hears me, but then I laid down." Now, for many of us, we can lay down, but you know what happens. We'll roll, and we'll toss, and we'll turn, and we'll get up and get maybe some warm milk, But David says, "I laid down and slept. And then I woke again." Do you find anything unusual about that? And the answer is no. It's very, very common. That's what we would like to see. But that's not usual. when your life is in danger and you may have only hours to live, David said, I can trust God. And I can trust God so much that I can sleep and then I can wake up, knowing that I am in God's hands the whole time. David says, I will not be afraid of many thousands of people who have set themselves round against me. Well, this was not an exaggeration in all likelihood. And not only was it not an exaggeration, but David could look across the valley and see all of those people. And so we find that God not only knows about our situation, but he cares about it. And so as we are hunkered down in our houses, remember that we have a God who cares about us, a God who will meet our needs, a God who will carry us through whatever we have facing us the next day. As we think about that, there are a couple of things that you can do that would be very, very helpful. First of all, do take proper precautions. But secondly, share with others. If you have toilet paper and a neighbor doesn't, share with them. And then lastly, take a few minutes to call 2 or 3 people, talk to them, encourage them, and share maybe even the same message with them. We will come out the other side on this, and through the whole thing, we are confident that God will be with us.